Let's bring in financial economist Francis Coppola. Francis, where's the negotiating power in this Brexit debate right now? Who has the upper hand?
Firmly with the EU, and always has been. The UK basically is negotiating with a gun to its head. It leaves the EU on March the 29th, 2019, whether it's got a deal or not. It's up against time pressure. It is the weaker part in the negotiations. We should remember it's the UK that's initiated this. All the EU has to do is sit tight and, in a way, wait for the UK to shoot itself in the foot.
Are economists good predictors? I did a conference in Norway this week, and we had two Nobel Prize-winning economists, and both said they're very good at analyzing why something is the way it is, but they're not good at telling you about what's going to happen tomorrow.
That's certainly true, and I'm not attempting to predict what the economic outcome will be. I mean, you were talking earlier about the possible cost of this or the benefits.
Right.
I'm not attempting to predict that. I think it's extremely dangerous to try and project that far into the future and say, oh my goodness, it's going to be terrible, or oh my goodness, it's going to be marvellous. The reality is probably muddle, but, you know, it's hard to predict. But I think in terms of looking at where the power balance lies, I'm not looking ahead, I'm looking at where we are now and saying, as far as I can see, it is the EU that holds the upper hand here.
Well, one thing you and I have talked about is game theory.
Yeah.
You use that to explain simply what's really going on here behind the doors.
Yes.
Explain that for us.
Yeah, it's basically about saying that you can think of this as being like, if you like, a game of poker or something like that, and you can look at the relative strength of the players' positions. Who is it who really holds the power? Who is it, if you like, who can afford to walk away? I know there's been much said about the UK being able to walk away from these negotiations, but in reality, it's the EU that can afford to walk away, not the UK.
Well, real quick, what do you think about Chancellor Philip Hammond really addressing the timeline here?
Well, he's been talking about what he calls a slope, a gentle slope into Brexit, which is quite nice. It's about the idea that we're going to try and avoid a disorderly exit, a cliff edge, a sudden change, which I think creates a much more certain and a much gentler move into, I guess, what is uncharted territory, really, than it could be. The problem is that it's probably going to take a long time. And so he's talking about an extended timeline.
Right, but the European Union will give them 3 years under their jurisdiction. Do you think he's really addressing that side of a timeline and what it means if they don't reach that?
Well, I think he is listening to that and saying the EU are holding us a half-open door here, which allows us to extend the timeline, though we have to do it according to the EU's rules, which means a period of time when the UK is effectively still in the single market and still subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice and required to operate according to free movement rules and all those things that apparently we want to stop. I think the problem he's got is not with the EU. I think the problem is with his own party.
Were you in favour of the UK leaving?
No, I wasn't.
And still, if the vote came up again, you would vote to go back?
I would still vote the same way, yeah.
Is that fear, isolation? And maybe fear isn't the right word, but I've talked to a lot of people that believe that if this goes south, the economic isolation could lead not to recession, but depression. I mean, what does the UK make? Where's the steel industry? Where's the iron ore? Everybody's got oil. There's a glut of it on the world right now. The prices aren't very good. So and you have to think about the tough times and the downside here. I mean, if the European Union economically turns against the UK, you're not going to get a very good deal, especially if you don't have a very strong prime minister and you don't have the political power. So this could go south.
It could.
And this could be economic isolation if it's not done properly.
I think the big risk here is actually not to manufacturing. I think the big risk is to services. The UK is a services-based economy and has been for a long time. I know we trashed our manufacturing industry in the 1980s, but in fact, services were a bigger part of the UK economy even then.
So the service industry.
It's the services.
Servicing the wealth.
It is absolutely right.
And not that's what it is. And not manufacturing and not making things and not being self-sufficient and outsourcing everything to the bottom line into the Asian realm. and the UK is going to be able to roll the dice economically and say, hey, we're going to do a better deal with the EU?
Can I say there's a lot more to services than just financial services, and I'm a little bit reluctant to limit this discussion to talking about financial services and forget about all the many other service industries there are in the UK. The point I'm trying to make is that it is services that drive the UK economy, not manufacturing. That has been the case for a very long time, and I don't see that Brexit is in any way going to change that. So the question in my mind is what happens, not to the tariffs that we hear a lot about, World Trade Organization rules, all that stuff. It's not that. It's about the non-tariff barriers, the things that make it possible for people to sell services into other countries without incurring barriers to trade to do with things like differences in law, differences in custom, differences in recognition of each other's educational achievements, things like that. They're much more subtle things that we don't really discuss.
What is the effect on the West? What's the effect of this on Mexico, Canada, the United States? What's the effect?
Of what? Of the
Brexit.
Of Brexit on the United States?
Yeah, what?
I've no idea. I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about
Well,
the
but
UK.
there's an opportunity there.
It seems to me that Mexico, Canada, and the United States have got enough problems of their own right now.
Well, they do.
Trying to renegotiate NAFTA.
Well, I'm speaking as an American.
Sure.
But where there's problems, there's opportunity. And let me hypothetically offer this: the UK is looking for a trade deal. There's a guy on the other side of the pond who's a big negotiator, at least claims to be. He's looking for a win. He's looking for a trade deal. Is this an opportunity for the UK and the United States to do things maybe in trade that they haven't done before?
Why would he prefer a trade deal with the UK over a trade deal with the EU?
He wants individual trade deals. That's the Trump, that's what he wants.
The EU is
He's already called out NATO for not paying their bill when it comes to security.
Fine, but I'm not talking about NATO.
Yeah, but it does have a lot to do with the trade deals too. I think that Trump would probably do a deal with the Brits if they aggressively push. There could be a business opportunity here. You don't agree with that?
I don't think the UK would be top of the list, no. I think that the renegotiating NAFTA is very high up the list. I think that potentially trying to do bilateral trade deals with other countries is quite high up the list as well. I think that actually trying to sort out some kind of trade deal with the European Union is higher up the list as well, and that has been the noises I've been hearing recently.
Are you pessimistic?
Relatively. Let me put it this way. One of the criticisms that was made of Remainers like me was that we were predicting this most almighty crash. Well, that never happened, and so now we're getting a lot of flack from the Leave side saying, well, the almighty crash you predicted didn't happen, did it? To which I would say, I personally, I can only speak for me, never thought that we would have that sort of crash. For me, this is like a slow burn. When we first leave the EU, we're going to take into our own laws pretty much everything that's in the EU laws anyway, so there won't be that much of an immediate effect, particularly on services, I think. The problem is the longer term, as things diverge, we will see, I think, our trade with the EU diminish. If that's countered by our trade with the rest of the world increasing to compensate, then potentially the outlook's quite good. But there's no guarantees about that. And on balance, given everything else that's going on in the world at the moment, I am pessimistic because I just think this is a really awful time to be doing this.
Let's talk about the negotiation. Theresa May at Brussels with the other 27 NATO members brought up the fact that, okay, we're going to allow 3 million people to stay here in the UK if a million Brits are going to be, UK residents are going to be able to stay in the European Union. What did you make of that? First of all, she got criticized by some for picking the wrong forum to release that. And if that is the case, why didn't she bring that up? It's been a year.
That is a very good question. I mean, interestingly, some of the people who have been most insistent that this must be sorted earlier on have been people who were campaigning for leave. Some of the most prominent Brexiteers have been saying we really have to sort this out and sort it out quickly.
And the reason I'm asking that is because immigration was a big push.
Absolutely.
A big motivator for this vote and move to start with. And so now she comes out. Would she have said that before the Brexit vote?
Well, I don't know what she would have done, but I mean, we certainly could have made this statement much earlier. And in a way, because the EU came and it put its position paper out first, and theirs was indeed quite a generous offer to their citizens, and therefore by extension to UK ones as well, because it was reciprocal. Therefore, they kind of stole a march, I think, a bit on Theresa May. She's got some distance to catch up. And part of the problem is that the proposal they've put forward would mean that the European Court of Justice would continue to have some jurisdiction in the UK, and that's not acceptable to the British side. So they've now put forward a proposal saying, well, we're going to have rights to stay, but overseen by the British courts, and that's not acceptable to the EU side. And so at the moment, we've got a bit of an impasse.
Can I talk about, as you say, you can analyze, but you can't always predict, as Larry pointed out. We are seeing a lot, hearing a lot of massive corporations moving already massive amounts of office space and saying, we're going to move 9,000, 1,000, insert the thousands of numbers, of our employees to Frankfurt, to Brussels, to Paris. Is this posturing? Or do you think this is a reality that they're saying, okay, when we get the indication we're moving, or is it sort of a bit of a threat?
I think it might be a bit of both, actually. I mean, the business community generally has not been in favour of Brexit, so there might, and financial services companies are known.
And these are financial services companies.
Applying a certain amount of pressure to government by threatening to do things. I mean, HSB has famously done that, threatening to move to Hong Kong to try and influence the outcome of the UK elections, that kind of thing. So it wouldn't surprise me if this was to some extent posturing. That said, all the indicators are at the moment that Brexit is going to be quite a rough ride, and the financial services industry afterwards is going to suffer quite a significant change. There are things that are going to be repatriated to Europe. That has to happen. And so it's reasonable that financial services would be preparing for that.
Can you tell us a well-defined answer of what Jeremy Corbyn's financial package is, what his belief? we know what he wants to do from the social end of things, but what's his economic plan?
I wish I knew.
Is that a slice I saw coming out
well,
of you right there?
This is an interesting part. This is a guy who has really had a political rebirth in many sense of the word, and he's done it. Well, the government should be doing this for you.
He's a great campaigner.
He's a great campaigner,
man.
but does anyone know what his economic package is? What he wants to do?
Well, to be fair to the Labour Party, their economic package was fully costed. I actually looked at the financial document, and sums do add up. The problem is whether what they've forecast regarding tax revenues and growth is actually achievable, and if it isn't, then their economic foundation entirely falls down. And I think there's one very important change they managed to achieve, and that is that they turned the debate away from Brexit, 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 which is what the Conservative Party were trying to do, to let's talk about health, let's talk about education, let's talk about social policy, let's talk about all these things, because actually that's much more important. And that, I thought, was quite a remarkable achievement. The problem is that Brexit, though, still is where we are, and all of those things are impacted by Brexit.
Thank you so much for the candid take on this. A real pleasure. Financial economist Francis Coppola, thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Thank you.